2020. A pandemic rages across the globe, from north to south, from east to west. Many have died, and many others are still suffering. Lockdowns have created limited social contact and have caused psychological distress. Could this pandemic have been foreseen and therefore contained? Well, there are no doubts that our exploitation of animals and its related hygiene problems facilitate the spread of zoonotic diseases, such as it is thought to be the case with COVID-19. Another approach will be discussed in this video, one that does not oppose scientific findings, but rather gives a description of astrological and astronomical findings to aid synergistically in the prediction of future pandemics. Can astrology help us?
(541 AD), port of Pelusium, near Suez in Egypt. Byzantine historian Procopius, who lived at the time, described how there was a pestilence by which the whole human race came near to being annihilated. By 542, the pestilence reached Byzantium, contemporary Istanbul, the center of the Eastern Roman Empire. The plague killed between 30 and 50 million people, and it was named the Plague of Justinian due to the Roman emperor of the time. Many historians believed that this outbreak contributed to the decline of the Roman Empire. Yersinia pestis was the culprit. This bacterium came back during the Middle Ages, from 1345 to 1352, killing between 75 and 200 million people, wiping out up to 50% of the European population of the time. This outbreak is still known today as the Black Death. 1520. When conquistador Hernán Cortés defeated the Aztec Empire, an estimated 90% of Native Americans were killed by smallpox, which was brought to the Americas by the conquistadors. In addition, many other diseases were introduced to the natives, such as leprosy, tuberculosis, malaria, and measles. On the other hand, as a result of the rapes perpetrated by the conquistadors, it seems that syphilis was brought to Europe. 1918. As the world was entering the last year of World War I, a pandemic killed 50 million people, surpassing the estimated number of deaths of civilians and soldiers caused by the war itself. This pandemic is known as the Spanish flu. 1981. AIDS, the condition caused by HIV, was first clinically observed in 1981. This pandemic is still ongoing and has caused 35 million deaths. What do these time periods have in common, apart from having been the worst pandemics recorded in history? The answer can be found in astrology. And does COVID-19 have the same planetary configuration as these pandemics? As above, so below. This is the Hermetic principle that has been used since antiquity to describe the relationship between the macrocosm, the universe, and the microcosm, our planet, and its living beings. Some physicists are starting to believe that the universe is a hologram, and as such, no matter how small a part of it is, it will still contain the information of the entire universe. For example, when the holographic plate of the image of a man is cut into two pieces, both pieces will still contain the entire holographic image of the man. This holographic perspective of the universe sheds light on how astrology potentially works, as what is on the Earth is similar to what is above. The solar system, which is the macrocosm, reflects the Earth, the microcosm, and vice versa. And, as we will see in the context of pandemics, the virus, which is part of the microcosm, is the planet Pluto, which is part of the macrocosm. As we will analyze later, it seems that this planet's energy is activated when eclipses happen, lunar eclipses in particular. Throughout history, different cultures feared the phenomena of eclipses, thinking that they were omens of bad luck. The Vikings, the inhabitants of ancient China, the Incas, the Inuits, and people from India are a few of the many who gave a bad connotation to eclipses. In astrology, the effect that an eclipse has on our planet can be understood by analyzing the planetary configuration of the solar system. Given at the maximum point of the eclipse, this would mean a snapshot of the solar system at the time of the eclipse. In astrology, planets have always been considered bad or good. In the left column, you can see the benefic planets, Jupiter and Venus, while in the right one, the malefics, Saturn and Mars, with the addition of the more modern planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, which are considered bad most of the time. As we will see, the interaction between Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter during an eclipse is the cause of pandemics throughout history. But why these specific three planets and not others? Pluto, discovered in 1930, right before the invention of the atomic bomb and between the two world wars, symbolizes death and regeneration and is named after the Roman god of the underworld. Such a small planet, now considered a dwarf planet, has these big attributes, just like the small size of the atomic bomb has the power to annihilate an entire city. Similarly, the tiny virus has the power to create a large-scale disaster, such as a pandemic. We therefore see how Pluto is astrologically correlated with viruses. It is rather astonishing that, 1 year after the discovery of Pluto, the electron microscope was invented, the first kind of microscope that was powerful enough to observe viruses and bacteria. Pluto uncovers the hidden, as its effects are caused by hidden minuscule-sized objects, such as atoms in atomic bombs and viruses in pandemics. Saturn is considered to be the greater malefic. It rules the principle of contraction. It symbolizes limitations, as it is limited by its own rings and represents the last planet visible to the naked eye, limiting our natural vision of the solar system. This characteristic of limitation was associated with Saturn long before its limiting rings were discovered in 1610 by Galileo Galilei. Other connotations given to Saturn are isolation, restriction, structure, science, authority, the ending of things, and the essential, many of which we are experiencing during the current pandemic. The gas giant, Jupiter, is the biggest planet of our solar system. It's the opposite of Saturn, as it rules the principle of expansion instead of contraction. While it generally expresses its qualities of abundance, fortune, and generosity, it can also manifest its principle of expansion to amplify the negative attributes of the malefic planets, for example, those of Saturn and Pluto. This happens when Jupiter is conflicting with such planets, for example, by conjoining or by making a 90-degree angle to them relative to the Earth. 0, 90, and 180 degrees are viewed as bad aspects in astrology. These angles can create energetic friction and can manifest as negative experiences. If Jupiter makes any of these angles with Pluto and Saturn, it will express its principle of expansion in a negative way, expanding the malefic energies of Pluto and Saturn. We can now understand how Pluto, being the virus, is enhanced by Jupiter and Saturn. However, the main trigger for a pandemic is an eclipse that interacts with Pluto. Pluto, the virus, has then the possibility to expand. An epidemic becomes a pandemic. If these eclipses happen in the axis of cardinal signs, the Capricorn-Cancer axis and the Aries-Libra axis, this will have a greater influence, as the cardinal signs represent the time of the two equinoxes and the two solstices, also known as the change of seasons. Now, let's see how this relates to the pandemics we've mentioned at the beginning of the film. Here we can see the solar system at the time of the outbreak of the plague of Justinian, mentioned at the beginning of this film. This is a geocentric chart, as our planet, the Earth, is in the center. This is because astrology seeks to investigate the influence that our universe has upon the observer. Here we can see the planets, including the Sun and the Moon, observed from the Earth, and here the zodiac signs. It takes 1 year for the Sun to cross the zodiac, 1 month for the Moon, 12 years for Jupiter, around 30 years for Saturn, and 248 years for Pluto. On the 29th of December 540 AD, a powerful lunar eclipse occurred, with Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter interacting. The Moon is eclipsed. It is opposite to the Sun. Here you can see the axis of the eclipse in Capricorn and Cancer, which is a powerful axis. Note that Pluto is behind the Sun and aligned to the axis of the eclipse. This eclipse strengthened Pluto on the level of the macrocosm, while on the level of the microcosm, on the Earth, the bacterium Yersinia pestis made its first appearance. Saturn and Jupiter were harmfully interacting by nearly making a 90-degree angle with Pluto and the Sun. A 90-degree angle is a negative aspect in astrology. When Pluto is activated by an eclipse and Saturn and Jupiter are negatively interacting, a pandemic happens on our planet, and in this case, it was the plague of Justinian. Here we see a similar eclipse occurring on the 18th of March, 1345, just before the Black Death arrived in Europe. John of Eschenden, English astrologer of the time, predicted that this eclipse would have led to death. Others, such as Geoffrey de Meaux and Guy de Chauliac, also explained the importance of this eclipse once the pandemic had started. Pluto is conjoining the Sun, as was the case with the eclipse preceding the plague of Justinian. Note that this eclipse happens in the cardinal axis of Aries and Libra. Saturn and Jupiter are interacting during the eclipse. They appear to be close to each other by forming a so-called Great Conjunction. A Great Conjunction happens approximately once every 20 years in zodiac signs of the same element, also known as a triplicity, as seen in this image drawn by Johannes Kepler. In this case, the triplicity is fire, as Jupiter and Saturn meet in fire signs, Sagittarius in 1723, Leo in 1743, and Aries in 1763. These make the 3 fire signs of the zodiac. These points of conjunction drift in time, thus changing triplicity every 200 years approximately. When the change of triplicity happens, global change is expected based on the element and the sign of the zodiac where the Great Conjunction happens. This is important to remember, as we will see in the case of AIDS in 1981 and COVID-19 in 2020. This Great Conjunction, with the addition of Mars, happening during the eclipse, was seen as the cause of the Black Death pandemic during the Middle Ages. In fact, on the 6th of October, 1348, the College of the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Paris issued a compendium of opinion on the Black Death in response to a request from the King of France, Philip VI. This report pointed to the lunar eclipse and the Great Conjunction as the universal cause of the pandemic. In this document, we can read, "We say that the distant and first cause of this pestilence was and is the configuration of the heavens. the document describes how the conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter created a putrefaction in the air responsible for the Black Death. Unfortunately, the culprit of the pandemic, namely the bacterium, couldn't be seen due to the lack of the microscope. But another culprit was hiding to the Faculty of Medicine of the time, the planet Pluto, only observable with the telescope, which was also later invented. A similar lunar eclipse happened on 22nd of March, 1521, when smallpox was decimating Native Americans. The same axis of the lunar eclipse of the Black Death is touched here, the Aries-Libra axis. In the eclipse, we see the Sun at 11 degrees Aries and the Moon at 11 degrees Libra. Unsurprisingly, Pluto is interacting by making a perfect 90-degree angle being at 11 degrees Capricorn. This isn't an ordinary event, as Pluto takes 248 years to cross the zodiac, and eclipses happen roughly 4 times a year. Saturn and Jupiter appear to be really close to Pluto during this eclipse, giving it more strength. It is interesting to know that the exact conjunction between Pluto and Saturn in the sign of Capricorn happened in January 1518, 3 years before this eclipse. The next time this particular conjunction happened in this sign, Capricorn, was 502 years later, exactly in January 2020, when the coronavirus started to spread. The disease caused by the H1N1 virus was first observed in January 1918 in Kansas, USA. If we look at the eclipses of the time we find at the end of the previous month, on the 28th of December, 1917, a potent total lunar eclipse was visible from the USA. As we can see from the chart given at the maximum time of this eclipse, the axis of the eclipse is again the cardinal signs Capricorn, Cancer. Pluto, the virus, is conjoining the eclipsed moon. Additionally, we find Saturn and Jupiter in proximity. This eclipse mirrors the scale of the pandemic in the first half of the year. In fact, while Pluto is in tight conjunction with the eclipse, Saturn and Jupiter are not so close. This is connected to the pandemic, as its first wave starting in January 1918 wasn't that strong. It's only with the following eclipse, which occurred on June 24, 1918, that we see Jupiter conjoining Pluto and the axis of the eclipse. This is connected to the second wave of the pandemic, which started in August 1918. This wave was the deadliest, and we can see it in this eclipse since Jupiter, with its principle of expansion, amplifies the strength of Pluto, which symbolizes the virus. Additionally, if we take this eclipse and we follow the path of the Sun in the next days, which makes 1 degree per day, we see how the Sun makes a perfect 90-degree angle with Pluto on the 28th of September. This is exactly the day when the death rate started to exponentially rise in New York City and in other cities right afterwards. AIDS, the condition caused by HIV, was first clinically observed in 1981. As in the previous examples, the lunar eclipse falls in the cardinal axis of Capricorn Cancer, while Pluto is interacting with the eclipse by making a 90-degree angle. As it was the case with the Black Death eclipse of 1345, Saturn and Jupiter are forming a great conjunction while being nearby Pluto. This conjunction is happening in the zodiac sign of Libra, the sign of relationships, which directly connects with the way HIV spreads, primarily by sexual relationships. This great conjunction represents a pivotal point, as it represents the change of triplicities, also known as the change from one element to the other, which takes place every 200 years approximately. This conjunction shows the change from the element of earth to the element of air, which correlates with communication and technology. The positive aspect of this great conjunction brought the first world's most influential computer to the public in 1981, the IBM personal computer, also known as the PC.
Maintenant, depuis cette concentration planétaire, c'est une nouvelle civilisation qui a commencé. L'ordinateur, il est né dans ces années-là. Mais l'ordinateur individuel, mais c'est un événement immense, historique. Il faut du recul pour se rendre compte de ça.
The next great conjunction will happen in December 2020 in the sign of Aquarius. As we have seen, this planetary configuration, which has Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter interacting during an eclipse, repeated every time a pandemic gave rise to a substantial number of deaths, this being more than tens of millions of deaths. When we take either Saturn or Jupiter out of these configurations, and we only leave Pluto interacting with the eclipse, we find that the death toll of pandemics is less elevated. This was the case with the following minor pandemics, resulting in 1 million casualties or less. The Asian flu, where Saturn is not interacting with Jupiter or with Pluto to have any big effect on the scale of the pandemic. The Hong Kong flu, where, again, Saturn is not interacting with Jupiter or Pluto or the solar eclipse to have any bigger effect. SARS, where Jupiter is not interacting with Pluto or Saturn. MERS and West African Ebola, where Saturn and Jupiter are not interacting with each other or with Pluto or the eclipse. The swine flu, where Saturn is not interacting with Pluto or Jupiter. It seems that only when Saturn and Jupiter are interacting with each other or to the eclipse, along with Pluto's interaction to the eclipse, we experience major pandemics, those which, unfortunately, result in more than tens of millions of fatalities. The great French astrologer André Barbeau, who unfortunately passed away in 2019, studied planetary cycles. In an article he wrote in 2011 called An Overview of Pandemics, he expresses his concern regarding the danger of a pandemic in 2020. According to him, this possibility was due to a conjunction between Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, also known as 3 of the 5 slow-moving planets. He also adds that this triple conjunction of planets could influence geophysical disasters, international affairs, nature, and society.
Plus les planètes lentes se rapprochent les unes des autres, et plus il y a effectivement une tendance à changer, au changement. En additionnant leurs distances respectives, on obtient un indice. Alors on fait un graphique. Et cet indice, il est extrêmement précis. Alors l'indice cyclique est le plus bas du 21e siècle en 2020. Dans 2020, on a une reprise en 2020.
But what do the eclipses of 2020 tell us? It is important to know that 2020 is exceptionally rare as it counts 6 eclipses throughout the year, whereas most years have only 4. Additionally, most of the eclipses of 2020 fall in the axis of Capricorn-Cancer, the same axis which is mentioned earlier for the previous pandemics. Already in July 2019, Pluto, which represents the virus, was activated by a lunar eclipse while conjoining Saturn. During the following eclipse, which happened on December 26, 2019, Jupiter approached the eclipse, conjoining it. This corresponds with the first cases of COVID-19 in China. The following eclipse was the crucial one, where Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter interacted with each other. On January 10, 2020, the lunar eclipse saw Jupiter, with its principle of expansion, getting closer to Pluto, Saturn, and the eclipse, while the axis of the eclipse perfectly aligns with Pluto and Saturn. As the other eclipse charts, this one is set for the maximum time of the eclipse. In this case, it was at 7:10 p.m. Coordinated Universal Time. The time in the city of Wuhan, in China, where the first case was documented, was 3:10 a.m. the following day, January 11th. It was on this day that China reported its first known death from an illness caused by the coronavirus. The patient was a 61-year-old man in Wuhan. This eclipse shows us a conjunction between Pluto and Saturn at 22 degrees Capricorn. If we take China's national chart, which is the sky at the moment of the proclamation of the People's Republic, dated for October 1st, 1949, we discover that Jupiter is on the same degree, 22 Capricorn. As we saw earlier, Jupiter expands other planets, so when Pluto and Saturn passed over this degree during the eclipse, they found China an easy territory to release their energies. Could this help explain why the pandemic started in China? As we see from this graph, the number of cases started to exponentially grow worldwide in March. It is in this month that Jupiter transited over the 22nd degree of Capricorn. Additionally, Mars, the planet of violence, passed through the entire sign of Capricorn in March, hitting all of these planets, thus worsening the situation. Could the movements of Jupiter and Mars cause such an exponential growth in the number of cases? This is the eclipse of July 5th, 2020. Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter are still conjoining each other, and the eclipse is happening right next to them in the axis of Capricorn-Cancer. This eclipse further intensified by Mars squaring the eclipse. This configuration mimics the ones of previous major pandemics, especially the one that happened right before the second wave of the Spanish flu in 1918. In fact, the 90-degree angle that Mars makes during the eclipse is visible in both eclipses. Is this position of Mars a sign of a second wave as it was in 1918? According to astrology, the effects of this eclipse could last until the following one, which is on November 30th. Within this period, one of the most impacted countries is the USA. If we look at the national chart set for the Declaration of Independence in 1776, we see that the sun is at 13 degrees Cancer, which is exactly opposite to the degree of the eclipse, 13 degrees Capricorn. The sun represents the nation's vitality, so the eclipse opposing it is not a good sign. Additionally, the eclipse squares the natal Saturn of the USA, which represents the nation's structure. The pandemic can therefore create instability in the structure and vitality of this country. To make matters worse for the USA, Pluto is completing its first cycle around the Earth since its position on the day of the birth of the USA. Pluto will reach that exact position in February 2022, but we can already feel Pluto's energy in the USA as this planet is approaching its return. And given that Pluto is the destroyer, we have to pay attention to any possible internal conflicts that could change the country forever. The other most impacted country by this eclipse is Italy, as the conjunction between Pluto and Jupiter of the eclipse opposes Italy's natal Saturn. As for the specific time of the worst wave, the most difficult month is November, as Jupiter, with its principle of expansion, transits over the 24th degree of Capricorn, the degree where Pluto the virus was during the eclipse. This might amplify the presence of the virus. December might also bring bad news, as Saturn and Jupiter will align. This specific conjunction, classically called a great conjunction, is a sign of pandemics, as the same alignment happened in 1981 when AIDS was starting to spread across the globe, and in 1345 right before the arrival of the Black Death in Europe. The world is now experiencing the energies of Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter, strengthened by these multiple conjunctions and eclipses in the sign of Capricorn. While Saturn is considered to represent structure, isolation, and the essential, Pluto represents the virus, destruction, transmutation, and it unveils the hidden. By aligning with Saturn in the sign of Capricorn, Pluto is showing the fragility of such structure, that being economical or political structure, while creating isolation for each one of us and stripping us down to the essential during lockdown. Furthermore, Saturn symbolizes limits and boundaries. Are Pluto and Saturn pushing us to reflect on the limits and boundaries of humankind? In a time where human beings are exploiting our planet's finite natural resources to grow their infinite, ever-expanding economy, is this the perfect time to question our limits on this planet? The third planet in this combination is Jupiter, which represents expansion. Are these three planets coming together to question the limits of our expansion? This wouldn't be the first time, as a similar fate was given to the Roman Empire. As the first pandemic example, we have reported the plague of Justinian in 541 AD, which sees Jupiter interacting with these two other planets. This plague is thought to be one of the causes of the fall of the Roman Empire. One of the other causes was the overexpansion the empire had reached. This expansion led to the massive exploitation of natural resources, which ultimately led to severe deforestation and soil erosion. Was the interaction between these three planets during the eclipse of 540 AD corresponding not only to the plague of Justinian, but also to the overexpansion and the fall of the Roman Empire? While the same planetary configuration is happening in the heavens in 2020, can we learn from the past and reflect on our own overexpansion? Are we exploiting too many natural resources?
As seen earlier, Pluto is the planet of transformation and regeneration. It is the transmutation that a caterpillar experiences when becoming a butterfly. Although it is hard to think of a positive side to this pandemic, these attributes of Pluto can give us hope. They can bring about a new world based on the values and humanitarian qualities we have learned during lockdown, solidarity being one example of them. But when can we experience such a change? We will have to wait until the middle of 2021 to see any improvements in the restrictions that were caused by the pandemic. This is because Jupiter, which represents travel, teaching, and social activities, has been restricted by Saturn, which rules the zodiac signs in which Jupiter is. To see such restrictions being lifted, we will have to wait until Jupiter enters its own sign, Pisces, which will happen from May to July 2021, and again from January 2022. The pandemic has had a huge impact on the socio-political structure of our world. This changing structure is foreseen to take place very soon, as society adapts very quickly to the consequences of the pandemic. In fact, astrology points to the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn that will happen exactly on the day of the winter solstice, December 21st, 2020, which may represent a turning point in our history and in our socio-political matrix.
The conjunction of these two planets in the sky is very important in astrology. Their conjunction happens every 20 years, and their meeting happens in zodiac signs of the same element. This example shows a great conjunction cycle in the three fire signs. Their meeting points form a triangle, which stays in the same element for 200 years. When these two planets meet in a new element after this 200-year cycle, a new triangle is made, which is said to bring a great change to society. For the past 200 years, these two planets met in the element of Earth. Our society started to extract resources from the Earth, becoming anchored in capitalism. In astrology, the element of Earth does indeed symbolize matter. Between two cycles, there is a period of overlapping, where the second conjunction happens in the previous element. After that, the conjunctions happen for 200 years only in one element. This was the case with the 1981 conjunction in the sign of Libra, an air sign. This was the first conjunction in the new cycle of air. In the next conjunction, happened in 2000, the two planets met in the previous element, in the sign of Taurus, representing the overlapping between the Earth and air cycles. This year, in 2020, the Great Conjunction happens at 0 degrees Aquarius, at the very start of this air sign. This marks the definitive entrance in the air cycle, which will continue for the next 2 centuries. Could this conjunction happening at the very beginning of Aquarius be the sign of the real start of the so famous and awaited Age of Aquarius, with its traits of social justice, activism, revolution, and communitarian values?
In astrology, the element air represents communication, technology, relationships, and the intellect. 2020 marks the passage from the element of earth to the element of air, of which we had a taste in 1981 when the HIV pandemic had started. The positive side of the conjunction happening in 1981 was the release of the first personal computer that revolutionized the way we live and communicate. Could this happen again for the 2020 conjunction? And could a similar advancement in technology improve our lives? As soon as the pandemic hit, we were pushed into using technology to stay in touch, work, and learn. For better or for worse, this conjunction symbolizes a change in what is represented by Aquarius and the air element. This can symbolize systemic changes in world communities and societies, humanitarian values, and a possible technological leap. Will this new society be more humanitarian and respectful to other forms of life? As we exit from these eclipses and these conjunctions happening in the sign of Capricorn, which represents structure, business, responsibility, and authority, we hope for a positive change in such systems of society. Aquarius can, however, bring rebellion into the status quo.
If we see the chart of the moment of this Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, we will notice that Mars, the planet of violence and war, is making a perfect 90-degree angle with Pluto.
In a crucial period where people are protesting, this can bring riots and similar conflicts in order to obtain a socio-political change. On a governmental level, it can bring the rise of totalitarianism, as it was the case in the 1920s, which followed the Spanish flu pandemic. While these thoughts are terrifying, the positive side of this conjunction in Aquarius is a sense of reflection and improvement in how we live in a community and help each other as a group. As the element of earth is being replaced by the element of air, will we see capitalism be replaced by a less materialistic society with more universal tolerance and respect towards the environment? And can this pandemic represent such a transition and a return to the essential, where we can focus on what is really important in life? Will we finally reach a peaceful international collaboration as a result of our experience in Saturnian self-isolation and reflection? And will astrology finally be considered a valuable tool to prepare ourselves not only for the outbreak of future pandemics, but also for their psychological impact and consequences?